Yeah, so Jim, great to have you here today. I know I'm James. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm with Carbide on the Manager of Partnerships and Channel, but I'm here today with you, Jim, and I know lots about you, but I'm wondering if you could tell the people watching who don't know lots about you about your background and what you're currently doing with Trava.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, James. It's always good to chat with you. Carbide's been a great partner to Trava. So my name is Jim Goldman. I'm currently CEO and co-founder of Trava Security. We're headquartered here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And really our vision is to become the standard for cyber insight for the cyber insurance industry. That sounds like a mouthful, but I'll be a little bit more explicit about that. But first, a little bit about my background and my journey that got me here. I've been in cybersecurity for over 30 years, which is pretty much as long as there's been a cybersecurity. What brought me to the Midwest here was I took a faculty position at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana in 1991, and I started the network engineering degree program there. Pretty quickly, we started talking about something called network security back then. I ended up starting the cyber forensics program at Purdue, and we got some funding, and I started something called the Purdue Malware Research Lab. We started reverse engineering malware, and it was about the same time where the FBI was trying to build their capability in that same area. They heard about the research I was doing and came to visit me, asked me to get a top secret clearance, which I did. I became a task force officer for the FBI Cybercrime Task Force, and I was lead cyber investigator for them in both the criminal as well as the national security cyber squads for 5 years. In 2011, I'd had enough of higher ed and wanted to get back to industry. And here in Indianapolis, there was a fast-growing B2C, business to consumer digital marketing firm named ExactTarget. And they were a fast-growing SaaS company trying to sell into the enterprise and international space, getting some pushback on the lack of maturity of their security and compliance program. So I became their first vice president of information security, got them ISO certified. And then 2 years later, in 2013, we were acquired by Salesforce and became the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So I was CISO of the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. That went from one company to 6 companies. And then Salesforce asked me to take a headquarters job and do the same thing that I'd done for the Marketing Cloud for all of Salesforce globally across all their clouds. And so what most people don't realize about Salesforce is it's just 50 or 55 acquisitions jammed together, each of which came with their own security and compliance program, or more likely lack thereof. So we built out enterprise security, governance, risk management, and compliance for all of Salesforce. And I did that until December 2019. And what struck me was that's the right way to do it, but it's not affordable for sub-enterprise customers, mid-market customers, et cetera. That's really what Trava was all about. How do we bring that same kind of security and compliance program to businesses that don't have the benefit of having like 10 people on their security and compliance team? So we built an automated platform, layered some professional services on top of it, put some packages together with the help of partners like Carbide, and it's going pretty well.
Amazing, Jim. I mean, you've definitely got the qualifications to speak on cybersecurity. It seems like you've been there from the beginning. And I'm curious, kind of, when you mentioned insurance at the top, but before we delve into maybe the specifics around what Trava does there, can you just sort of define what Trava is as a whole?
You bet. So it starts with our platform. And so we built our own risk and vulnerability management platform. So let's start with the risk part, all right? Cyber risk needs to be measured against some kind of framework. You can't randomly just say, this company has this risk, because chances are you'll overlook something. And so what we set out to do is we said, we're not going to invent or reinvent a framework. There are great frameworks out there, such as the CenterNet for Internet Security version 8, the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology cybersecurity framework. And then there's more compliance specific frameworks like SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA, CMMC, etc. The insurance industry has their own frameworks. There are controls they're worried about. Some are specific to one insurance company or another. Sometimes it's generic. They call it the critical control survey, etc. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to have a variety of these risk assessment surveys available where customers could answer plain English questions that would correlate to relative maturity of the implementation of that control set. We compile all that data, and then what our platform does is it takes that really simply understood and input information about the relative maturity of the implementation and turns it into actionable risk data. And so in our platform, you get what's called a risk register. You get a risk mitigation roadmap so people know what to do. And then the more technical side of cyber risk is vulnerability management. And so what we do there is, again, we have our own scans, external scans, internal scans. I know we're going to talk more about that later, so I won't go into too much detail. We have a wide variety of scans that look at the actual vulnerabilities in a company's information system platform. It says, you may have hundreds of vulnerabilities. We try to make it understandable. We'll say, if you do nothing else today, just look at these 5. Never mind the other 995. Just take care of these 5. The other thing that distinguishes our platform is when you click on one of those 5, it's going to give you you're not going to have to do any other research. It's going to give you all the information you need in terms of what's the threat, what's the impact, what's the probability, where exactly is it? Do you need to look up references? It's called CVEs. They're all right there. If there's a patch available to fix it, there's going to be a link right there. So we try to be the one-stop shop. Again, it goes back to that notion that I talked about. We're not trying to develop this for the enterprise that has a room full of security engineers. Our persona that we develop our platform for is called the marginally security savvy individual. That's who we design our platform for.
I mean, and that makes a lot of sense because there's so much need for every business, not just the enterprise businesses, but we see it, data breach happens across any industry, whether your company has 10 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. There's data breach happening all the time, and you're giving up your customer data sometimes when that happens. So you want to avoid that. But as you're rolled, you get the platform, and you mentioned your services. So maybe you can define, I think you've sort of defined yourself as a vCISO or virtual chief information security officer. But what is a vCISO as a whole?
Absolutely.
What do you do?
Yep. So that's a very good question. It's not one person. It's not just me. You get a team of people that comes into, again, the sub-enterprise or mid-market size company. Why? Because they need to go on a security and compliance journey. Their customers are telling them, we love your product, whether it's a software product or otherwise, but we're really worried about sharing our data with you because we're not seeing the maturity that we need to see. A lot of companies are familiar with the dreaded security questionnaire, 600 questions, right? About, are you doing this? Are you doing that? It takes hours and hours. Or the alternative, right at the top of the questionnaire usually is, are you SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certified? If you are, it's like skip to the end, right? That's all they need. And so a lot of what we do is our platform is part of the solution, but we very rarely sell just our platform. It has to be that bundle of the services where our experts in compliance, vulnerability management, and the virtual chief information security officer put together that roadmap to take our customers from where they are to where they need to be in their security and compliance journey, all the way through, getting externally audited and having that sheepskin, if you will, that certificate that says you are now ISO 27001 certified.
And when we say the word vCISO or virtual CISO or virtual chief information security officer, you exist because many companies can't afford a full-time one, right? And so we're coming in at that small to medium-sized business level and saying, look, hire us for our services on a contract basis, and you're not paying someone, $250,000 a year to be your quote unquote CISO, you're acting in that position, which makes sense to me. And then from there, you've mentioned your own platform, but outside of the Trava platform, as a vCISO, there must be other tools you're using.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, another term for the V or the virtual CISO that sometimes makes more sense is fractional, right?
Right.
You're getting a fraction of a highly qualified, highly experienced CISO for, as you said, a fraction of the cost of what it would cost to hire that person full time. So that's an important distinction. You're absolutely right. Like a lot of companies, we know what we do well. And then if there are other companies that are doing something complementary well, we're not going to try to reinvent the wheel. Carbide is a perfect example. When we need to take a customer on a journey to compliance, to certification, all right, we'll do the risk and vulnerability management, but there's a whole other pretty complex platform called compliance management platforms. We think Carbide's, one of the best, if not the best, at that. And so a majority of our customers that need to go on that compliance journey to get that certification, we have them on the Carbide platform.
And you got to use the platform because I guess as a fractional CISO as well, the platform, obviously, I know it well, is going to give you your policies and give you your path forward to manage that towards compliance on top of the services you're providing. And that's going to link into your tool that's going to help manage the risk. From there, are you working with MSPs as well ever, or other services that provide a broad range of tools? Like, do you work with MSPs for like firewall, endpoint, anything like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. But let me say, I think you're selling Carbide short a little bit, because yes, it does provide the policies, but as anyone knows, you could go on the internet and download those same policies, right? That's not the real value. The real value is for each one of those policies that are associated with a given certification, all of the certification specific controls and tasks are already linked. So what I always tell our customers is the policies talk about the what you promise to do, but it's those controls and tasks that get into the how are you going to do it, and what evidence do you need to gather and store in order to prove that you're doing what you claimed or what you promised you were going to do.
You're right. It's taking you from A to Z through your compliance. It's giving you your policies, it's giving your controls related to those policies, how they all relate together, your path forward, and then collects your evidence along the way, in many cases automatically, to set you up so you can pass an audit or demonstrate the strength of your InfoSec or information security program. What I found is along the way, there's going to be controls for various aspects of security, which is why I think we were talking about MSPs and beyond just the Trava platform. If you're a small to medium-sized business, yes, you have the policies in place that say, we're going to do X, and you're going to say that we're going to do X by doing these steps. But in those steps, is there a need for an MSP to provide other platforms as well to make sure you can meet those controls?
100%. And let's just use Trava as an example, because as a security company, it's important that we can prove that we're secure, right? So 3 months ago, something like that, we got our ISO 27001 certification. And we use, even though we've got security experts here, we can't do everything. So we have a managed service provider, and, to your point about certain controls that must be implemented. One of the controls for ISO or for SOC 2 is you have to have someone watching the store, figuratively speaking, 24/7, looking for anomalous behavior, looking for potential intrusions and reacting to those intrusions. It's called what's called IDR, intrusion detection and response. We outsource that. We can't afford to keep Trava employees, minding the store 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And likewise with other services as well. Protection has always started at the perimeter, right? What's happened with COVID and the pandemic and working from home and remote work is the perimeter changed. When everybody went into the office, it was on a corporate network. And so that corporate network was considered the network perimeter. Now everybody's working from home over who knows what kind of internet connections, right? And so employees' laptops in their homes or coffee shops or whatever, that's now the perimeter of the network. So someone has to be watching from that perimeter, literally from employees' laptops. They have to be configured not just securely, but consistently, right? They have to be monitored for, they've got the right software on there and none of the wrong software on there. Who's going to do that? Do you have an internal IT staff to do that? Most small companies, probably not. And so that's it's that IT services, IT management part that you're going to outsource to a managed service provider as well.
And that could come with like different products that do endpoint protection to your firewall or your antivirus. All that has to come from somewhere.
Malware defense, backup and recovery, data protection, encryption at rest, encryption at transit. Somebody's got to be implementing and monitoring all of that.
And even yourself. So even as a vCISO, you might engage an MSP to do that anyway.
We do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when we think about challenges for your world, so outside of the challenges we mentioned that are like the security challenges, needing to hire an MSP to help with all these other services internally, and you kind of think of your top, maybe 2 or 3 challenges as a vCISO in this world, what are they?
Just picking up where we left off about the different, categories of tools that you need in order to implement the different controls. Each one of our customers' environments is slightly different, right? They have a different combination of Windows versus Mac versus Linux machine. Some are on AWS, some are on Azure, some are on GCP. So depending on the nature of their environment, the specific type of tools that they might use would be different. And therefore, they may be looking for a different kind of MSP that specializes in taking care of Microsoft 365 environments only or Google environments only. So that's really part of the challenge is, yes, we are vCISOs, but we really need to know all the different tools and services that are available in all these different control families, because the chances are they're going to be slightly different for each one of our customers. So we've kind of started to keep almost like what we call a tech stack inventory of, this customer that has these characteristics uses this series of technology. This one that's a little bit different uses this series of technology.
Right. So that's probably a challenge in itself, just trying to keep track of the world we're in right now.
Well, and there's always new tools and better tools. And it's, so yeah, exactly right. But just because we're up here, and by we, I mean you and me and Carbide and Trava, just because we're up here in the security program and compliance program management, that doesn't mean we don't need to be down in the weeds in the security controls technology in order to properly advise our customers.
Do you find it hard to keep up with it? Is it changing that fast?
Yeah, but it keeps me young. It keeps my brain.
I bet. This world seems to be going faster and faster. Cyber criminals are getting more and more sophisticated. AIs. I always think like as many programs as there are to help us manage certain tasks through AI, the same type of people, threat actors, are using AI to speed their time up, which doesn't help the process. How do you vet these third-party tools? Like, you probably have confidence in the Trava tool. You vetted Carbide. When you see these new tools pop up, how do you even vet them?
Well, let me tell you a funny story about cyber criminals and working faster first, and then I'll answer your question. So, we started to have an experience where every time we onboarded a new employee, within about 2 weeks, they would get a text from somebody purporting to be me saying I was busy in a meeting and they needed to do a favor for me and order some gift cards or something like that, right? And so we got smart, and in our employee onboarding deck, we would put a warning slide saying, just so you know, in the next week or two, you're going to get a text that looks like it's from Jim. Well, we just onboarded a new employee, this past week, and he didn't even make it until the employee onboarding session. So literally, within minutes of him posting on LinkedIn that he was now, a new employee at Trava, he got a text supposedly from me.
Right. I mean, it's amazing how fast that happens, right? And then how many, as part of our world, we need to be connected. So we need to be on LinkedIn.
Right.
We need to be out there. So, and it gives away exactly, if you're watching Trava's employee and it pops up, it gives that away. And so when you think about that, like, how do you prepare? How do you vet these tools? How do you make sure that, you're using the right ones?
Well, truthfully, part of it is we depend on, it's sort of the community, it's the network. So we depend on our customers, right? They'll come up with a tool I haven't heard of, and I'll say, okay, well, tell me about that. How are you using it? Do you like it? How'd you find it, et cetera? And then I'll go do some research on it. So it really is this kind of community effort to keep each other informed.
And you do that through you keep each other informed. You must be working on message boards. I guess message board is an old word now. I don't even think they exist anymore. But Facebook groups, is it Twitter? Is it LinkedIn groups? Like, where do you go?
So one of the things that we do is we meet with our customers quite frequently, sometimes as often as weekly. And, we have like customer success software where we not only kind of take notes on what was discussed, but that's where we also keep a profile of the customer. And so we've got a listing of what compliance management platform are they on, what cloud environment are they in, what are they using for secure endpoint configuration, who's their MSP, who are their external auditors, that kind of thing. So we almost have that tech stack inventory in our customer profile. But the other thing that we do, speaking of kind of message boards and what do you do now, is, I don't know if we can plug another product, you can edit this out, but we use Slack a lot. And so, when we have a new customer onboarded, unless for some reason they don't use Slack, don't want to use Slack, because we set up a Slack channel, an open Slack channel with that customer. The beauty of that is there are multiple people on the Trava side always keeping an eye on the Slack channels. So it's way better than them sending an email to me or someone specific in an organization who might be on vacation, so forth and so on, don't see the message. Something hits a Slack channel, someone's going to see it and they're going to get a response. If it's something that is more appropriately, like a technical support ticket, we can instantly turn a Slack message into a ticket and send it to support, that type of thing.
That makes sense. I mean, look, we're communicating, so faster than ever now. We can, like, I guess we mentioned AI again. It's one of these things that can create the opportunity to send messages quicker and quicker. We're moving quicker and quicker. The need to be able to communicate is probably that much more, especially when you're helping your customers understand threats. If the threats are moving quicker, you need to educate quicker. Right. How do you educate them? How do you keep them up to date? Make sure that they're doing everything when you're not around. Is there a process for that?
Well, a lot of it has to do with a roadmap. When we bring a new customer on board together, we put together a roadmap, and there tends to be usually about 4 or so streams, rows, whatever you want to call it, to the roadmap. There's the compliance roadmap, which compliance certification, if any, are you interested in? How fast you need to get there? What kind of pressure are you getting from your customers? That type of thing. So there's the compliance row. Then there's the risk management row. There's the vulnerability management row. And then many of our customers, at least our direct customers, are software development firms, software as a service companies. And so there, it's really important that we engage with them to produce that secure software development lifecycle. It's sort of like the old expression, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And so the better we can get good habits instilled in their software development lifecycle, the far fewer issues they'll have down the road. So it's really that roadmap is our biggest education piece. And then I think the other piece is, as I mentioned before, we do that initial inventory. We call it a baseline cyber risk assessment to note those gaps, note where their biggest risks are. And again, we don't want it to be overwhelming. We don't want to talk about all the gaps they have in all 18 control families. So we just take like the top 5 to 7 that have the most critical need. And that's what we concentrate on initially. That's where we educate them. To answer your question, it's like, okay, in order to properly mitigate this risk, we need to talk about a policy. We need to define processes. You may need to buy some technology. You may need some people training involved, that type of thing. We try to make it very non-threatening is the word that comes to mind.
And when you think about this, SaaS companies versus non-SaaS companies, because I think you have a mixture of both in your clients.
Yes.
Is there a different? I mean, every industry is probably different anyway. And maybe the answer is clearly yes. But I'm curious, from like a SaaS company versus non-SaaS, is there specific differences you're looking for?
So the main difference with the non-SaaS companies is obviously they're not developing software. All right. So we're not so concerned about the software development lifecycle. However, most of those non-SaaS companies still have websites. And in many cases, those websites are not secure or well developed and may have vulnerabilities. And some of those companies say, well, we don't really care. It's just a marketing website. And what I caution them about is if you have a vulnerable website and a cyber criminal puts what's called a watering hole attack on there. So in other words, there's malicious software embedded on your marketing website, and someone legitimately goes to your website for whatever reason and is infected with that watering hole attack, that company could be held liable for the damage caused to that third party.
Okay, so and you're thinking about that when it comes to software-minded companies, SaaS companies that are creating software. What are the particulars about that?
Yeah, so they're much more concerned with the quality of their software. And so when I said we have a wide variety of scans, one of the scans that we have is called a web application scan. And so it's looking for specific vulnerabilities that many web-based applications have. That there is I guess I would call it an index of typical web-based application flaws called the OWASP vulnerabilities, things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, et cetera. And so our scan will develop that. And what we tell our SaaS customers is make sure before you release new software, whether it's weekly, monthly, whatever, make sure you are doing that web app scan to identify any vulnerabilities in advance before the release.
When it comes to the world we're living in, the cybersecurity, vCISO, MSPs, there's a couple of things that come together in my mind. One, it's clear that no matter how you look at it, it's a whole system of different companies and services working together. It's not just firewall. It's not just, antivirus now. It takes almost a village now to secure your company, which is why I'm taking from what you're saying. It's like having a vCISO, some sort of consultant helping you, having a compliance tool that's generating your policies and collecting your evidence that says you're doing what you say you're doing, and you can sort of map to those controls and map those policies to those controls and make sure you're doing those things well. And on top of that, it takes an MSP to come around or some sort of organization you're getting lots of other software from, like your SOC, which is different than SOC 2, but Security Operations Center, 24/7 monitoring, endpoint protection, all of that. So if we kind of think about the fact that we all need to work together to secure one business, that the business is going to engage in multiple services these days. They almost have to, whether they're 10 or 1,000 folks. What do you see the future of all this? How do you see it all coming together? How does it change?
You make a really good point with the third party dependency, right? Like we're all using, a cloud provider like Google or AWS or Azure, right? And so one of the big control areas that has a lot more emphasis, I'll say now, than it did in the past. Sometimes it's called vendor management. Sometimes it's called service provider management. There's a lot more scrutiny on that now. And kind of a twist on that in the software development space is called supply chain management. So if you stop and think about it, a lot of SaaS companies, software development companies, use open source libraries of different types, right? And so, every once in a while, there'll be a flaw or a new vulnerability discovered in an open source library. Well, if you've been developing software, you have to have excellent record keeping to know, did you use that particular library or not? In the past, we never bothered to keep track of that stuff. Now it's absolutely essential, to the point where there's almost like a new term that's evolved called a software bill of materials, an SBOM, BOM, not BOMB, right? And matter of fact, many government agencies now will not buy software that doesn't ship with an SBOM, so they know exactly what libraries, what open source libraries, et cetera, are included in every piece of software they buy. That's just one aspect of vendor management. Another that is essential for compliance and certification for all of our customers is, it doesn't have to be complicated. It could just be a spreadsheet, but anyone that you depend on to deliver your software and services, especially if they ever touch your customer data, you have to have evidence that you did at some level of assessment of their security and compliance. So even if it just involves going on their website, seeing if they're SOC 2 certified, downloading their report, et cetera. If not, they have to fill out a security questionnaire, that kind of thing. So there's a lot more scrutiny, as you said, kind of, it takes a village. Well, this whole village has to be sure they're checking up on each other.
And really, so when it comes to the future of all this, it's not going to get less complicated, you don't think?
No, I think it'll get more complicated. What I think is, it seems foreign right now. It seems like extra work, and not everybody's doing it. Some people are doing it to different degrees. I think in not too many years, nobody's going to have choice, right? Everybody's going to have to do it. And so in some sense, it will take less effort, because it'll be the standard. It'll just the way it's done. It'll be second nature. One of the examples I always use, totally unrelated, but in a way not, is sprinkler systems in buildings, right? Why do they do that? Because fire was a risk. Cyber risk, fire risk, it doesn't matter. Were buildings always built with sprinkler systems? No, absolutely not. Why did they do it? Because there were tragedies, right, where the fire department couldn't get there in time. Why do stairways need to be clear, and why do they need to be sufficient exits for people to get out of buildings? These are all risk mitigation strategies that were put in years ago, right, that we now take for granted, right? Someday it'll be the same thing with cyber. There will be just standard accepted practices, right, best practices that everybody does.
Just like we didn't all wear seatbelts 30, 40 years ago.
Bingo. Exactly the same thing. Yeah. And then eventually, we don't even think about it now, right? It's a given.
Right. Well, look, Jim, this has been a great conversation. I'm curious, is there anything else you want to add before we go? You don't have to have anything. We can always, we can do it. We can do a wrap up.
No, as you know, James, I love talking about this stuff. I love working with you, but no, I don't. There's nothing that you didn't ask me that I said, I wish James would ask me.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jim, thanks so much for the conversation today. This is very informative. I think it's always great to hear from different aspects of the industry, and including the fact that one of the main takeaways I've got from today is just how many different groups are involved with making this all work, and how important it is to have, a vCISO, someone helping you make sure that you're making those decisions, because you've got your eye on the ball. You're trying to keep up with best practices. You're trying to keep up with everything, and everything's changing so much that we all need that support to make sure that we're not falling out of compliance, and essentially, and it takes, like I said, a village to get there. So thanks so much for chatting with us today. And you know what? I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, we're all in this together for sure.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, James.